10 times Gene Roddenberry hated Star Trek. Gene Roddenberry was very proud of the universe he created, but also very protective. Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, was very passionate about the franchise throughout his life. He constantly advocated for the Trek, to portray an earnestly optimistic future for humanity, one that mirrored his own hopes for a better tomorrow. See, I'm trying to talk posh, and it all goes wrong. I get my H's wrong. While most of the time the writers and other creative people working on Trek tried their best to follow Gene's utopian vision, there were times where it was simply too restrictive to the story. Gene wanted to have no main characters fighting with each other, no storylines that involved technology being used as a villain. We've had a few of them. No recurring aliens or themes, and plenty of other things that, if followed, would have ruined Star Trek. Of course, Gene's optimism is still respected by the creators of Trek today. It's not respected at all. Sorry, what culture, you don't know what you're talking about. But in a way that's much more realistic than Gene originally intended. See, these will be people that like Discovery and Picard. Oh, well, they're allowed to, I suppose. Can't all be jaded like me. But I do like Moon Knight. Some fans criticise modern Trek for not following Gene's guidelines as precisely as the original series or the Next Generation, but it should be said that some of the greatest moments in Trek history were strongly opposed by Mr. Roddenberry. This list will be looking at 10 times that Gene Roddenberry hated his most beloved creation. Number 10, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. It may come as a surprise to Trek fans that one of the most beloved movies in the franchise, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, was actually disliked by Roddenberry for many reasons. Yeah, because it was sidelined, wasn't it? Although the motion picture made money, it was received poorly by critics and general audiences, most people finding it a bit boring and pretentious, some even going as far to dub it the motionless picture. I've got to admit, when I saw it as a kid, when I was 12 years old, took my nephew to see it, who were, I think it's about 4 years younger than me, something like that. And all he did, I say I was only 12, all he did was talk to the kid behind him in the seat and say, "My Uncle Steve," that's my name, "my Uncle Steve can beat up your dad." I was only 12, so spending half at film telling him to sit down and be quiet. But it was boring to me. Like I said, it was I was a Star Wars kid. So I like Star Trek. I watched it on telly and stuff, but I was expecting, a bit like Star Wars, a bit more action-packed, and it wasn't. But I love it now. I love Star Trek the motion picture now. It's great, brilliant. Anyway, it became clear to the studio that in order to reinvigorate Star Trek, they would need to go in a radically different direction for the next film. They took a lot of Gene's creative control away, instead letting Harve Bennett take the lead for the new script. Roddenberry was of course upset with having his control taken away, though his biggest issue with the film was the supposed militarisation of Starfleet. It's all kind of military, isn't it? He hated the violence in the film and thought that the Genesis device was a ridiculous idea, whether or not he was right today. The Wrath of Khan is regarded as one of Trek's best stories. The introduction of a strong villain, a classic from the original series no less, showed that Trek can be exciting and fun while still smart. Yeah, it is. It's amazing. It Star Trek 2 and Star Trek the motion picture is as well. It's like comparing Star Trek 2 and comparing Star Trek the motion picture. It's like comparing Alien and Aliens. They're like different animals, aren't they? Both great in their own way. Right, number 9, Family. Oh, what did he hate this for? The Next Generation episode Family directly follows The Best of Both Worlds, the iconic 2-part episode where Captain Picard got assimilated by the Borg and turned into Locutus, destroying countless Starfleet ships. 39. At the Battle of Wolf 359 before having his humanity restored at the end of the episode. In Family, Picard returns to Earth with the Enterprise to visit his family and recover from the trauma of being assimilated. And there's the Enterprise in space. Well, it's not space dock, is it? But it's an orbital facility. It's given a name in it, but I can't remember what it is. I can't remember what it is. Anyway. No. Gene Roddenberry was strongly against this episode, wanting instead to keep the stories self-contained in each episode. Apparently Gene would have rather had Picard go right back to boldly going, mere days after having the very essence of his individuality taken from him, and being forced to kill thousands, about 11,000 actually. However, his main criticism of the script was the way that Picard's upbringing was portrayed, and the hostility between him and his brother. He argued that siblings would simply not argue and fight like that in the 24th century. I think you're wrong there, Gene. Family would eventually be recognised as one of the most emotional storylines for Picard, giving his character more depth. It also helps audiences recover after the best of both worlds and makes it a little more believable for Picard to return to work in the next episode. Number 8, the original series crossovers on the Next Generation, and there's this encounter at Farpoint, and that's Admiral McCoy, who did an inspection of the medical facilities on the Enterprise D. Strangely, Gene Roddenberry didn't want any classic characters from the original series to return in the Next Generation. His reason for this, as stated in the official Star Trek series Bible he wrote, is that he wanted the newest Star Trek show to stand apart from the original as something new and different. This was a noble goal. Roddenberry was committed to not letting the franchise go stale, constantly evolving it to be grander and more modern. This is something that shows like Discovery, Lower Decks and Picard are continuing to this day. However, every now and then a cameo from another series in the franchise can be fun to see. It helps the universe feel truly connected and real. See how I just read them names and I didn't like, gag or do anything. I just thought I'll just read through them and not comment. Roddenberry was originally very adamant against crossovers, but caved in and allowed DeForest Kelley to make an appearance as Dr. McCoy, Admiral McCoy, in the Next Generation pilot to tour the new Enterprise D. Eventually, sorry, there's noise behind it. I know there's nobody in, but Ian is upstairs and Princess is out. Eventually, Star Trek became more comfortable with crossovers, and during Deep Space Nine, Voyager and other following shows became a deeply connected universe, much like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Yeah, it's nice to see all characters pop up. Like I say, one of my favourite episodes is Relics, where we have Scotty in the Next Generation episode, Relics. Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, and there's the Enterprise blowing up. Never understood why the saucer section all blew up like that. You think the warp core's in there, isn't it? In the secondary hull down there. You think that'd be the bit that blew up, wouldn't you? But no, they blew up the saucer section. That made more dramatic in it. Nowadays, there have been so many ships called Enterprise in Star Trek that it's hard to keep track. This wasn't always going to be the case, and yeah, it was shocking. And oh God, they blew up the Enterprise. But this wasn't always going to be the case. Gene Roddenberry had a strong emotional connection to the original Enterprise and was heartbroken when it was destroyed in Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. Harve Bennett, another main creative head of Star Trek at the time, knew audiences would appreciate the shock ending of having the Enterprise self-destruct to save the day. Roddenberry, however, believed that the destruction of the Enterprise was symbolic of Bennett trying to take creative control over Star Trek and change it to fit his own vision. Roddenberry eventually caved in when it was decided that a new Enterprise, the Enterprise A, would be constructed to replace the original. I mean, caved in. It didn't have anything to do with it. By this time, Roddenberry was just, in the movies, just a creative consultant. He didn't have any power. Previously, the plan was to do away with the name Enterprise forever and have the Excelsior be the main hero ship of the franchise. Number 6, the removal of Number 1. The pilot episode of Star Trek, the original series, The Cage, the original pilot, featured an entirely different cast apart from Spock. Among them, playing the first officer, Number 1, was Majel Barrett Roddenberry. I don't think she was. Yeah, she wasn't Roddenberry then. The partner and future wife of Gene Roddenberry. Gene Roddenberry wanted to give Barrett a lead role in Star Trek, but when the studio watched The Cage, although they were intrigued by the premise of the show, they hated the cast, particularly two of the lead characters, Spock and Number One. Gene eventually convinced them to keep Spock, but all the other characters had to be replaced. Barrett lost the role of First Officer, but appeared in future episodes of the original series, wearing a blonde wig, playing Nurse Chapel in a number of episodes. Eventually, during The Next Generation, Barrett went on to voice a number of computers on the show, as well as the fan-favourite character Luoxana Troi. Also, Star Trek Strange New Worlds is set to premiere soon. The show is based around the adventures of the original crew from The Cage, including Number One, now portrayed by Rebecca Romaine. So although Jean was annoyed by Barrett's exclusion, she eventually got to solidify her place in Trek in other ways, and her character Number One is finally getting the spotlight. Number 5, we're halfway. Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. I liked Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. Yeah, it's got its problems, but that scene, the campfire scene, is one of my favourites in all of Star Trek. Singing Row, Row, Row Your Boat. It's great. Star Trek V, The Final Frontier is regarded by many fans as the worst movie in the franchise. But one of its most vocal haters was Gene Roddenberry himself. Gene even prepared to take legal action against William Shatner, the director of the film, for abusing his creation and slapping the name Gene Roddenberry on it. The case never materialised, but it did cause a lot of drama behind the scenes. Shatner and Roddenberry didn't talk much, if at all, during the production of the movie, but when Roddenberry learned about the plot, he became irritated, believing that Shatner was ripping off an old movie he was working on, but never finished, called The God Thing. The script had somewhat similar religious themes as The Final Frontier, and Roddenberry was under the impression that Shatner was stealing the story that he desperately wanted to tell. Wasn't The God Thing going to be the original story for the motion picture? I know, but it was In Thy Image, wasn't it? And I don't know, I can't remember. But it did, I don't know. But as I said, he didn't have any power at this time, did Roddenberry. This is why he got The Next Generation going, didn't he, on TV, because he didn't have any power in the movies. And he eventually didn't have any power in The Next Generation. And there you go. Right, Redemption. The Next Generation Season 4 finale, Redemption, was the 100th episode made for the series, and as such, Roddenberry wanted it to be big. Redemption continued the Klingon political arc that began earlier in the series. In the episode, we saw a civil war beginning to brew in the Klingon Empire. The conflict was resolved by the end of the episode. It was a two-part, wasn't it? But Roddenberry was still upset that the 100th episode of The Next Generation featured a war plot, something he considered too bleak for the show. Ronald D. Moore was responsible... It's Klingons, isn't it? Ronald D. Moore was responsible for pushing Redemption into production, despite Gene's wishes, and most fans are glad he did. Moore was responsible for creating most of the updated Klingon... Klingon aesthetic, and had a real talent for creating believable alien cultures. Redemption is just one example of Moore taking the Klingons and fleshing them out to be more believable. Beyond his typical hatred for violence, Roddenberry also didn't believe that Worf was a strong enough character to carry the 100th episode. Fortunately, Redemption and a few more episodes, especially in Deep Space Nine, eventually turned Worf into a better lead character. Yeah, it was very good. He just likes throwing... He just liked to throw his weight about, didn't he? And be, pissy, basically. It was his baby, and it was taken away from him. And Next Generation was taken away from him, pretty much. And he got, he got salty, and he's every right to, I suppose, but, it happens. Episodes where technology is the enemy, the Borg. While Outlook, he had loads of it in the original series. Ultimate Computer, for instance, and episode with Nomad, the Changeling. Well, maybe he didn't like those episodes either. While outlining the rules for Star Trek The Next Generation in his official series Bible, Gene Roddenberry was very clear that he wanted the writers to avoid portraying technology in a negative way. Roddenberry was very aware that many people love Star Trek because it takes place in an optimistic future, one where technology is humanity's salvation rather than the cause of its demise, as is the case in most other science fiction. Replicators, transporters and warp drive turned Earth into a paradise where all people are free to explore the universe and pursue their passions. However, this advice has been blatantly ignored of the next generation many times. The Borg, for example, are a technological nightmare. Yeah, but it's not human technology, is it? It's alien. That's alien technology. Are a technological nightmare that serves as a warning for anyone looking to integrate computers with people's minds, such as the binars. Or what about the constant transporter and hologram malfunctions? Yeah, well, they're malfunctions, aren't they? All technology has a good and a bad side. Gene Roddenberry was an optimist and couldn't imagine why someone would use a replicator to create a gun rather than a cheeseburger. But eventually the writers abandoned this guideline altogether, not in fear of new technology, but in acceptance of its destructive possibilities. Well, yeah, you don't want to just get rid of a wealth of story ideas just because, he likes technology and he don't want it to be used against us. I mean, technology is, in itself isn't either good or bad, it's how it's used, isn't it? Right, the disappearance of Wesley Crusher. Oh, well, glad to see it back of him, little sod. Wesley Crusher was one of Gene Roddenberry's favourite characters in Star Trek. Yeah, because he gave him one of his names, didn't it? It was his Gene Wesley Roddenberry or something. Mostly because the character was actually based on an idealised version of himself as a teenager. The audience's reactions to Wesley deeply upset Gene. Because we're annoying. At times, due to Wesley being based off of himself, he even saw their hate for the character as an attack on him. The truth is that most people disliked Wesley simply because he was too perfect. Yeah, but a bit of a... I don't know... what's a male version of a Mary Jane? I don't know. A Mary John. During season 1 of The Next Generation, Wesley was the star of the show, constantly saving the ship and beating impossible odds and never making any mistakes. Oh, he did make mistakes. As the series progressed, Wesley appeared less and less before leaving the ship to attend Starfleet Academy, then ditched the Federation altogether in the episode Journey's End to explore space and reality with the Traveller, his mysterious alien mentor. Oh, pardon me. He isn't seen after this point until the movie Star Trek Nemesis, where he's just sitting in the background during the wedding scene in a Starfleet uniform, though. Dress uniform. Gene Roddenberry was always annoyed that his self-inserted character was sidelined, especially because it wasn't the studio that rejected him, but the fans. Yeah, but it was annoying. And it happened a lot in the 80s and early 90s. They had to have a kid, a teenager or a kid on the show. And they even did it in Galaxy Quest, didn't they? They took Mickey out of it, having the kid as the pilot of the Protector in the original series of Galaxy Quest, obviously. Because he'd grown up in the film. Anyway, right, the animated series. Why did he hate it? He created it. Star Trek, the animated series, was basically created to keep the love of Trek alive in the zeitgeist long enough for the movies to be made. Oh, no. The show is actually quite good. It is very good. The storylines are very reminiscent of the original series, though sometimes even grander, as the animated format allowed the writers to tell any story they wanted, regardless of the budget constraints. Although, you could tell the voices were done by, all the voices of the other characters were done by the same as, the crew. Because you can tell the voices. And you always had either Nichelle Nichols or Majel Barrett, going at some point. as a psychic alien woman going. But anyway, Gene Roddenberry, however, disagreed. He famously hated the show because of a few minor story errors, but these errors were nothing worse than what was seen in the original series. The fact that the Next Generation ships are way slower than Kirk's Enterprise, for example. Well, no, that's just how the warp scale, they changed the warp scale, didn't they? Despite this, when Roddenberry's office reobtained the creative licenses for Star Trek at the end of the Next Generation's first season, he officially made the animated series non-canon. According to Gene, it never happened. Misery guts. Nowadays, matters are a little more complicated. We've seen references to the animated series in Deep Space Nine. Have we? Ooh, I have to think about that one. Lower Decks and other Trek installments, and it seems like it's making a return to canon once and for all. As David Gerald, a writer for the animated series, puts it, arguments about canon are silly. I always felt that Star Trek Animated was part of Star Trek because Gene Roddenberry accepted the paycheck for it and put his name on the credits. Yeah. Deep Space Nine mentioned the animated series. What did they mention in that? I don't know, I can't remember now. I'll have to do some research.